All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Boyd. I just want to introduce myself. I'll be moderating this international session, and by that I mean it's really international because our fellow speakers come from as far as Norway to New York. Adam is in New York, and he's hopefully still awake. Of course, it's 3 in the morning, but great to see him on this side. And of course, my two friends, Zaliza and Dr. Dalia, who represents Malaysia in a sense. I myself, I'm a chartered town planner. I'm a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute in the UK. That was when I was doing a planning degree at the time, and until now. So I'm still a member, which is nice, and it can open a lot of doors, of course. Same as the MIP, Malaysia Institute of Planners. I'm also working at the moment with the Global Covenant of Mayors project for Asia.
So can you all see my slides now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Zaliza Muhammad Puzi. I'm representing Plan Malaysia, or previously known as the Federal Department of Town and Country Planning. So being the first presenter, I think the first two, this is my content of the presentations. The first two subject is actually to give a glance a bit of about Malaysia. Just now we have some, what mentioned was we're having some international attendees and also speakers here. So I just give a glance through. But the main important aspects that I will touch is the second last and the last part, which is the focus of this presentation. So in terms of administrative structure of Malaysia, just now that somebody was asking where is Johor, where is Boyd right now. So he's here, the eastern part of Peninsular Malaysia, while I'm talking from the federal authorities of Kuala Lumpur, which is a part of Selangor, near Melaka and also Negeri Sembilan. So Malaysia consists of two distinct regions, the Peninsula and also the Sabah and Sarawak. So Malaysia adopt a 3-tier system of governments, which is the federal, state and also local government, and each in turn runs in their respective level of governance machineries. So eventually, the Town and Country Planning in Malaysia appears on the concurrence list of the federal constitutions. Since the topic I propose is the role of Plan Malaysia towards spurring low carbon city in Malaysia. So I'll begin this presentation on briefly explain the main functions of the Plan Malaysia. So Plan Malaysia previously is known as the Federal Department of Town and Country Planning, Peninsular Malaysia. So Plan Malaysia is a leading agency under the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, and the main function is to spearheading spatial and land use planning matters and practices in this country. So we also plays a role through its functions at 3 levels of the government, which is the federal, state and local government. So I'll just show you some of our organization charts. This is our headquarters, and we have this office in each state, and our project zone office, who is currently assisting the local authorities and also state governments in preparing policies and also plans. In performing our duties in Town and Country Planning in this country, these duties are set forth in the Town and Country Planning Act 1976. So essentially the 172 Act reinforced a 3-tier system of government, that is federal, states and also local government. So as I think most of us know, that Malaysia was a British colony until gaining its independence in August in 1957. So in terms of development planning, the profound influence of British still exists. For example, the structure plans and local plans, the terminologies still and function are still remaining until now. So I think it's all about the introductions of Malaysia administrative structure and also the spatial planning and the role or functions of Plan Malaysia in general in this country. So next, I'll bring you the actual focus of these presentations on the low carbon city initiative in this country. So in these presentations, I don't want to touch on what Malaysia have pledged in the COP. I'm sure that majority of us, especially in Malaysia, have heard the statements. But as for me, the involvement of this green development, low carbon and climate change thing since I've already engaged in this green developments, low carbon, climate change things for about 10 years now, since our Prime Minister's pledge in COP15 in 2009. I came across research on the climate design of Malay House that can be described as best example of buildings and responding to climate change. So these building materials are using natural materials in terms of design, and the entire house applied the passive design concept, taking into account the natural light and also wind orientation. So that makes the house has low thermal capacity and brings comfort to the people lives in the house. So these houses was built way back in 1940s, 50s perhaps, and Malaysia starts to recognize the green architectural designs in 1987 by Mr. Yuan. So I think the green building or climate design or green and low carbon practices was not something new to Malaysia, but eventually was practiced by our great grandparents long time ago. So I'm not going to elaborate more, but I assume that the secretariats will disseminate these presentations to everybody. So I will not read whatever on the slides. Yeah, so I'll go to the next. So my team currently embarks on the projects of studying and come out with low carbon cities planning guidelines. So this is how my team and I synchronize the whole scenario of Malaysia climate change and low carbon city agenda. As you can see from the slides, all the agenda of sustainable development, new urban agenda, climate change and low carbon development agenda is translated into our national, regional and also local context. So the plans, the policies, even our development plans like the National Physical Plan, Urbanization Policy and also Rural Physical Planning Plan also have aligned with all the national as global agenda. And also and in the regional and states level, such as Iskandar Region Development Authority, Selangor and Johor, and also some of our states already trying to incorporate the sustainable developments, the climate change and also low carbon agenda into their structural plans. And at local level, it's really perhaps the most active and most participative that have a lot of green developments, low carbon, which they have voluntary to publish their own climate change agenda. So this is actually what I will focus on our projects, which is the low carbon guidelines. All right. So this is what we have done throughout, I think, for the past 1 year. So as a milestone of Plan Malaysia involvement in low carbon city, as what Mr. Boyd have already mentioned, that me and Datin Paduka, Dr. Dahlia has involved from the beginning, I think since 2011. And in 2012, we have published Green Neighborhood Planning Guidelines and also the implementation guides of what she used to be the low-hanging fruits initiatives, the bicycle lanes, pedestrian walk, community gardens, rainwater harvesting and the compost states. So way back, although in 2009, Plan Malaysia have embarked on this Central Forest Spine Master Plan, but this project, however, we did not align it with the climate change issues, but how somehow it's more on initiatives to protect our forests, right? So we go through the years, throughout the years. Right now, all the national physical plans, urbanization plans, national rural physical plans are actually aligned to trying to address and also mainstreaming the low carbon city and also climate change agenda. So this is the part that somehow I would like to share and focus with all of you. So we are currently, my team and I are currently embark on the research on to come up with guidelines for local authority and also for the project managers that prepares local plans, because local plans, as I mentioned earlier, and also show you the hierarchy of our plans, is actually legal binding documents. So how are we going to align this climate change impact into our local plans? So we have embarked on reviewing more than 40 documents since then. So while reviewing all these documents, what you say is the main Bible of when you talk about climate change is the assessment reports published by the IPCC. So IPCC, when highlighting the approach of mitigating and adapting climate change, both of mitigations and also adaptation emphasize on the spatial and land use planning. But what does it mean into planners, town planners? So when we do this research, we come across that mitigations is actually to reduce the GHG emissions, and the keywords here is low carbon. But when they talk about adaptation, it refers to the process of adapting to climate change and climate impacts. So the keywords here is actually climate resilience. So when reviewing all those documents, we find out every document talk about mitigations and adaptations. And if you look at the Low Carbon City Master Plan, which is published by, I'm not sure it's published or not, by the Ministry of Environment, it touches on the measurement, management, and also mitigations. And all these documents talking about the role of spatial planning verbally, I mean, very general, but how actually spatial planning and land use planning can play its role into mitigating and adapting this impact of climate change. So I'm not going to go further on these examples of adaptations and mitigations, because eventually these aspects have already touched in our plans, either at the national plans, local plans, and also structure plans. These have been considered and addressed in each plans. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you, Zaliza. Very interesting topic, of course, and very, very topical today, relating to the climate issues that we are facing, we being the whole world itself. And even in Malaysia, as I was saying earlier, it could be that this is the monsoon season, so it's raining quite heavily. Luckily today is a beautiful day outside, so I've made some reservation on that, which is good. But we are aware, of course, that in other parts of the world we face a lot of flooding, forest fires, and things like that. So it's quite a big thing to think about, and it's how we tackle that and look after our environment is critical in how we do things. But thank you for that presentation.
My name is Dirk Ahlers. I work as a senior researcher at NTNU, and I'm part of the Smart Sustainable Cities group. So we are a rather multidisciplinary group within NTNU working on topics of smart cities and on sustainability and how to combine that. And particularly, I wanted to talk about the project Positive City Exchange today, that we are doing with 7 European cities as one example of the way we work and the way we work around sustainability and the energy transition. I was invited here through Trondheim Kommune, who was originally invited itself, but they forwarded it to us to bring a bit of a wider understanding and also kind of a little bit of the European wider perspective in that. So we can just to quickly explain the title. So we're doing a lot of work around these topics, and one of the big topics of our time, of course, is climate change and emission reduction, which transforms into the energy transition. We need to decarbonize the energy system and the way cities are run. And that, of course, is then also linked to urban transitions in different shapes and forms. And that's kind of the background for what I'm going to present. If you can put up the next slide. And one way that we try to address all these very different types of challenges and different types of needs is by following an approach of co-creation and open innovation, which means we are trying to bring all the different stakeholders together for an issue, which allows us to work together with quite different types of people, of companies, of institutions, of citizens, and also to acknowledge that we do not know all the solutions. There is a lot of things out there. It needs to be integrated. The different stakeholders and the different people need to be integrated into these solutions. And in the end, also, you want to have these taken up. If we do research at the university, that is a value in its own, but we don't have an impact on society or in actually helping shape the energy transition and making sure we can reduce our emissions if we don't actually distribute that into the cities, into the world, down to people again. So a lot of the work we're doing is developing concepts, developing frameworks, holding a lot of workshops like here in the background, discussing how things work, and then also looking at strategies, at linking European and city strategies down to individual players, and then also building projects and building systems, both on kind of the conceptual and strategic side, and also actually deploying technical solutions through the capacity of the university or the capacity of the partners that we work with. If we can switch to the next one. So I'm quite far away from most of you, I assume. So this is the map of Europe, and these are the cities we work with in that Plus City Exchange project. We're also quite active in the overall European landscape of projects of smart city activities and in the Norwegian setting of smart cities, of sustainability, and issues around that. So on this map, you see 2 cities that are called the Lighthouse Cities. Those are in that project the ones that are going ahead, get a lot of resources to test out, develop, and fine-tune solutions, which in this case is in Norway, the city of Trondheim. That's also where our university is located. And the second one is in Ireland, the city of Limerick. And then we have 5 other cities across Europe that are intended to replicate the solutions that we build, to show that they actually can work in very different settings. So we don't do something that only works in one place. So this kind of self-evaluation and testing and scaling things out is very much built into a lot of these European projects, because that's kind of the way that the European research programs work. You need the distribution across the geography to make sure it works across the different climate zones, across different environments, about slightly different regulatory environments, and so on. So this is kind of the setting, and in other projects that we would do on the European scale, it would look similar. In some also we do them only in Norway, which of course then would be a bit of a smaller map. And this then fits in with the overall European approaches also on over climate adaptation and mitigation, on the very wide scale coming energy transition, and also on the upcoming process that you may not have heard, or maybe you have. It's called the European Green Deal, which combines now the massive mission-driven work towards reacting to climate change, and on the other side to also link it up with economic recovery after the COVID pandemic. And it kind of also merges a lot of the existing work streams and tries to make it more mission-driven and more focused. Right, then on the next slide, if we can jump. I seem to be blocked here. Can anyone still hear me?
Hold on, I think she's having a break here. I'll help you share again.
Yeah, okay, yes, there was a hiccup. It might also have been on my side. Right, and so in this particular project, Positive City Exchange, what we are working on is positive energy blocks. It's a bit complicated. There's a lot of things going on the slide, but the overall idea is quite simple. It's not just doing the very high level strategies of we need to do the energy transition, but to translate this down to the very local level and to see what does that mean for a block in the city, what does it mean for a neighborhood or district in the city, and then what does it mean for the whole city. And the idea here is that you have a block of buildings and all the infrastructure between them that overall produce more energy than they need on kind of an annual basis, which means you need local generation, you need buildings renovated up to a very good standard, and you need to deal with all the infrastructure between it, which then allows this whole thing to become a hub of growth within the city and within the energy system of the city to produce more energy and cover some parts around it as well. And then it's inherently built that you can grow this, so you can decarbonize bit by bit parts of the city. You can do individual blocks that are separate, or you can link them up, you can grow them. And there are three main themes around this. One is to integrate it with urban planning, to have energy being a larger part of urban planning in the future, because it will need different approaches to make this happen. Then it actually deploys a lot of things on the ground. So it does retrofits of buildings, it does local generation, like solar panels, like thermal turbines in water bodies, in rivers, anything else like that. It also includes mobility and issues like that. So electric mobility is a very strong topic in Europe, especially in Norway. It's very massive. And then also we integrate the citizens in this to have a say in how this might work, what they want to build out of this, and also to find ways of how to invest and how to make this whole thing happen. And this is the overall thing. We have a lot more information on that, of course. This is just the overall idea, growing from very small, very manageable sites that we can do more or less right away, and then grow that so we reach the goals for 2025, 2030, and 2050. And then I just have a few examples to show how we're doing that. If you can switch to the next slide. So these are some hubs that we are starting from in the different places that we have. I just want to highlight the one on the right, which is one of our follower cities in Sestao. That's an upgrade building that is integrating a district heating system that is right in the district, very local, fueled by biofuels. That carries a lot of the energy need. And on the left side, you see Powerhouse Brattøra. That's an office building right at the fjord in Trondheim. It's designed by Snøhetta. It's quite a landmark now. It is covered in solar panels and it has a lot of heat pumps to the fjord. So this one is already a positive building, not just on the energy use, but actually over the whole lifetime, including all the embodied emissions. And this is a hub, this has energy to give away, and we are also working on how it will be able to share this energy of how to balance between like residential and office users over time, how to integrate mobility. So we have chargers for electric cars, we have chargers for electric buses right at the building and items like that. So it's both the concept and then the actual local deployment of actual buildings and some of the smart hardware that is needed. Then on the next slide, I just have compiled some maps. On the right side, you see the city of Trondheim that I just showed. And you see all the other cities here as well. You see these are all very different scales. We are targeting kind of the medium to small cities in Europe to showcase also that this concept of starting with the local small places will work in very different settings. And of course, there are many more small cities than large ones. So we hope that this can be scaled up in a quite organic way throughout a lot of smaller places that can then also showcase that this works, and it helps them to reach their local goals. It helps reaches the national goals, and it also links back to the United Nations SDGs. Then I see I'm running out of time. On the next slide, I just have kind of put up the scaling thing again. We start with blocks, bring them up to districts, and then grow that to cities. And we have a number of specific interventions and innovations we have here. I'm not going to go into details. If we go to the last slide, I've put all the different links in here of where you can find us and where you can find me. And we also have very extensive documentation on our Smart Cities site and on the City Exchange website itself with a growing knowledge base of all these solutions that are described in quite a lot of detail. So thanks very much again for the invitation, and then we can later take any questions in the discussion session, I think.
Thank you. I shall start the presentation now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your kind introduction, Boyd, and also to the organizers for inviting me to share some snapshots on low carbon cities in the context of Malaysia. And as you know, there's so much literature on this subject and it has been very well documented. So what I'm doing is just a very general perspective of what's happening in Malaysia. Some history, just a little bit of history in the Malaysian context. There have been many individuals and communities consciously and subconsciously supporting the green agenda since 1990s. And on the government front, agencies have started putting together actions and guidelines relating to green neighborhoods and the consequent low carbon initiatives. And whereby, as had been mentioned by the first speaker, at the federal government level, the Town and Country Planning Department had commenced their green neighborhood guidelines in 2010. And that's over a decade ago. And this had paved the way for implementing action plans in local authorities, including cycling, urban gardening, rainwater harvesting, and also improving walkability. Then it was like a just do it now kind of approach, you know, because you need to move without measurements at that time. And the Green Neighborhood Award was also mooted then to create awareness and also to create a competitive spirit amongst local authorities to support the local, low carbon agenda in local authorities. And in synergy with this guideline, there are other various agencies producing similar guidelines, and also value added. The low carbon cities framework had factored in also calculations, monitoring tools, comprehensive and holistic as well. And meanwhile, during that same time, 2010, 2011, 2012, Putrajaya, which is Malaysia's administrative center, had branded itself as an intelligent and green city. And in 2012, I think Boyd is central to this. Iskandar Malaysia published its Low Carbon Society Blueprint. It's the first regional authority to do so. and it remains the lead, I should say, and focal point for the implementing of low carbon cities in Malaysia. So that's a bit of history in this part of the world. No maps because the first speaker had shown some map just now, and that helped me a lot. So as rapidly urbanizing nations, all of us know that emissions from cities remain a concern. Emissions from the transportation sector holds the bulk of the problem, and solutions lie in the main areas emitting carbon emissions in urban areas, transportation, buildings, urban infra. And also all these not only require technological solutions, but how planners, the way planners design and configure spaces and land use. Next slide is just a snapshot again. When you talk about reducing carbon emissions, you talk about smart growth and all the keywords here on areas that spatial planners need to address in reducing emission, improvement and focus on public transportation, including efficient networks. And important also is resolving the first and last mile issues. And also we need to plan clustering of mixed development around transit stations. And now we are no longer making cities for cars, you know, plans should not be car centric. In many cities already, there are ideas that pedestrian is king, you know, and this has been highlighted in other countries, and in Malaysia, we hope that we can commit to more walkability, yeah, and other spatial approaches that concerns that we need is to promote urban regeneration. We talk about prioritize brownfield development, places with mixed use, high connectivity, and commit the potential of working from home. We have been talking about working from home a long time in Malaysia, but I think the commitment was maybe the perspective, you know, the perception of people that working from home is not viable. But of course, the COVID-19 has shown that this is possible. And as planners, how do we plan now? What are the projections that we need to do on commercial spaces, for instance, in post-COVID situations? So back to the slide, other familiar actions that we know, cycling, neighborhood and community farms, not only for food security, but also to reduce emissions in delivering these. And also planners talk about the 15-minute city, where all city residents are able to meet most of their needs within a short walk or bicycle ride from their homes. So just to summarize what I had highlighted earlier on the components of low carbon cities, this is a lot to digest and it is actually a lot to see on the PowerPoint, but yeah, but how we shape our cities' urban form has implications on decarbonization. And we talked about smart growth strategy earlier, mixed use development, brownfield development as opposed to sprawl and greenfield development. What are the planning strategies, for instance, that limit trip generations across different land uses by motorized private vehicles? And of course, that brings us to the forerunner of the contributor to public transport. Public transport should be integrated, interconnected, multimodal, and supported by TODs, for instance. We talk also about low carbon vehicles and also cycle paths and walkways. Yeah. And what is important also is the finance aspects and incentives. And I would like to just some snapshots on what some cities in Malaysia are doing. Yeah, Kuala Lumpur has its low carbon society blueprint 2020-2030 with action plans parallel with other low carbon cities. They talk about green mobility. They talk, Kuala Lumpur talks about energy efficiency and low carbon green buildings. Also blue and green network. This comes up again and again. And a lot has been done to improve cycling and walkability in the city, and also sustainable water and waste management. If you see at the bottom page of the slide, there is green city governance. That is also an action in the action plan of Kuala Lumpur. When you talk about governance, I think green leadership is also important, as evidenced in Putrajaya. Putrajaya is the administrative center of Malaysia. It has a commitment to further improve cycleways by the Ministry of Federal Territories, as well as substantially stepping up tree planting. And the Putrajaya Green City 2025 blueprint has 3 quantitative environmental targets: low carbon Putrajaya, cooler Putrajaya, and 3R Putrajaya. And very quickly, this is a very famous low carbon society blueprint in Malaysia. It is comprehensive and holistic and has been benchmarked in other cities in Malaysia. And similarly, it addresses urban form and smart growth, low carbon lifestyle. And what is important here, I think, is the what it says about low carbon lifestyle, calling for involvement from individuals of all levels, communities, government agencies, and private businesses to support the low carbon planning agenda. Shah Alam City also has implemented low carbon actions with planners in the lead, and also there are other councils, other councils that are in the forefront of low carbon initiatives: Petaling Jaya, Ampang Jaya, Seberang Perai, Hang Tuah Jaya, Kuching North, Miri, Cyberjaya, and Cyberjaya, to mention a few. And if you can see there, Petaling Jaya Homeowners Low Carbon Green Initial Assessment Rebate Scheme has been introduced. And this is also the Seberang Perai Low Carbon Green Print. And many cities also in Malaysia have also participated in the implementation of the low carbon city framework. If you can see here, we have also shown phase 1, 2, and 3. Those which are phase 1 in blue are awareness and advanced training, and phase 3 has achieved carbon reduction. Yeah. Yeah, just very quickly on when you talk about low carbon, you talk about investments, and investments have been a challenge when you talk about low carbon, yeah, but Malaysia has managed to have some more low carbon projects, such as the electric vehicles in charging station and charging station infrastructure. There are BRT systems operating in Iskandar development region and even in Kuala Lumpur, the Sunway. City cycleways in Putrajaya, and on-site waste processing projects in Petaling Jaya, for instance. But there are many more small, maybe low technology, low cost, as opposed to high technology, high cost solutions that are being taken on. When you talk about policy and institutional framework, Malaysia has, well, I could say that it has a good coverage. We have it all actually. Many of our national policies support low carbon development, climate change. Yeah, the national policy on climate change, the green tech policy, renewable energy action plan, to name a few. And we have many guidelines and framework which have been mentioned earlier. And we have development plans also addressing the low carbon agenda in the National Physical Plan and National Urbanization Policy as policy statements, which these are the ones that set the framework for land use planning, for state structure plans, for district local plans and special area plans. And when you prepare these plans, these are often supplemented in some cities and municipalities by carbon blueprints and also low carbon action plans. Very quickly, I would like to just maybe dwell a bit on the post-COVID situation and carbonization. And of course, everyone knows that this pandemic is giving cities a rare chance to reinvent and reset themselves. And there are lots of lessons that government can learn to develop better, safer, and more sustainable urban areas. And beyond the temporary containment and drop in emissions, maybe the COVID-19 pandemic could trigger permanent behavior changes in the way people work, travel, and trade. I've spoken about working from home, which never took off in Malaysia in a big way. But when the pandemic comes, everybody realized that, oh yes, we can be productive working at home. Of course, when you work at home, you reduce the trips a lot and emissions as well. Yeah. So behavior changes, teleworking and teleconferencing, and the growth of digital businesses may help also curb the emissions. And also perhaps there was this discussion also as a legacy of the pandemic, people may be less keen to use public transport. You know, it's just a perception that public transport is not safe. So would we be expecting an increase in emission, for instance, for car use when all the lockdowns are over? Will people be driving more? Yeah. And what are the spatial implications of these? And in some cities, you know, some of the offices had been, which are now empty, are being converted into residential areas. Will be seeing that in many cities, and also in Malaysia perhaps. So there are many things that planners, you know, that we have been talking about. Soho, small office, home office. How do we do that now? How do we handle this kind of situations now after there are behavior changes post COVID-19? And of course, now people are now staying at home. There are many delivery vehicles coming to houses, you know, delivering food and other goods. What is the implication on emissions here? So it's just an open-ended question, like, but there are a lot to think about. The land use changes, the way planners plan in the context of post-COVID-19. Before I conclude, I would like also to share with you what Malaysian Institute of Planners had done to contribute to the low carbon cities agenda. The Malaysian Institute of Planners has its own low carbon cities and sustainability center, and it is a subsidiary company under the Malaysian Institute of Planners. aiming to advance Malaysia Institute of Planners' role and involvement in promotion, in research and development, and in a knowledge contribution on low carbon cities and also sustainable development. So if you can see here, the targets are on areas in capacity building, communication, education and public awareness, career development, as well as community engagement. And the scope of work includes preparing roadmaps, promoting LCCF, low carbon city framework, further for greater awareness and acceptance to local authorities, undertaking training, and also making improvements to the document, the low carbon city framework document, and also the carbon calculator. It also includes MIP also assists in monitoring the implementation and impact of implementation for overall carbon reduction to be part of the input in the national carbon reporting to IFCC. So, and also assisting in the accreditation of low carbon cities and developments. So with that, I think I will conclude my presentation. I hope that it has not been too general, but if you want to ask detailed questions, we have the Q&A. So, so thank you very much. This is an image of old about it's about low carbonization as well. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Dahlia. Thanks for very, very interesting and insightful ideas from Malaysia.
Thank you. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. At Borough Happy, we work on a number of climate action plans across the world. We work with organizations like Global Covenant of Mayors and C40. My focus is mainly in North America. And I'm going to discuss New York City's 1.5 degrees plan, which is basically a Paris Agreement compliant climate action plan. The journey started a long time ago, actually, really originally with the Plan YC report, New York City's first sustainability plan, then going into the One NYC report, which is focusing really on equity. Then at the time, Mayor Bloomberg made a commitment for the, or prior to, Mayor Bloomberg made a commitment to the, former Mayor Bloomberg made a commitment to 80% reduction by 2050. Target, and then ultimately New York City, as part of the C40, basically is required to meet the Paris Climate Agreement. Note, please, and I think it's really important that in the US specifically, every city and every state is different. There is no federal, I would say just recently, now we got back into Paris, thankfully, on the federal scale, but everything is fairly voluntary for the most part, other than in states like California, for example. And there's a number of states that have made commitments and a number of cities, of course, that have made commitments. We had a lot to work from, and I think that's critical in regards to New York City does annual greenhouse gas inventories, and we also worked on the roadmap, the 80 by 50 plan, which is 80% reduction by 2050, which really set a number of goals and strategies. This plan really focused on actions. And so we developed a number of trajectories already from the 80 by 50 plan. Greenhouse gas emission trajectories, as well as, of course, the business as usual trajectory, which really helps set a benchmark. What we did in the plan was assess what is happening. I think this is important. What existing actions are on the table already and being implemented? What is going to happen? What is in the pipeline? And what we need to do now. And what new actions we need to do now to achieve really the target in this case now is carbon neutrality. The exercise, helped us understand, near-term actions that need to be achieved. Some of them are quantifiable, but some of them are not. Some of them are just important to do. And that's really one of the key parts of this project, was to really understand what are the near-term actions we need to get to the path that we need to get on. Because as you can see from the dark line, Right here, we were not on the trajectory that we need to get to. So what are the enabling actions? What are the multiplying actions? That type of thing. Just a typical methodology, and what we've been doing is inclusive climate action methodology. And what's important here is it's an iterative process. You need to work with agencies, you need to work with stakeholders to be comfortable with the actions that they're committing to. So when you develop a long list of actions and you start quantifying these things, you go back to the drawing table sometimes to try to get the right framing of the action, the right language being used, because these really are commitments. The plan was organized by sectors, themes, and using the New York City 1NYC principles, focusing on growth, equity, sustainability, and resilience. These are important in communications. How are you going to communicate this to different audiences, these actions to different audiences? So that's why we broke it down this way. Like, for example, if you're focused on energy, great, you'll see your actions for energy. If you're focused on, but if you're focused on a number of things, cross-cutting, you might be just looking at consumption or clean energy, or if you're focused on the benefits, right? And I think the typical average person, I think that's what's critical here, is what are the benefits of these actions? So we created a dashboard to simplify the actions to the audience. And as you can see here, there's a number of criteria was used for each action, and also kind of we made sure that each action had a lead, who's actually leading that action within the city. There's also not shown here is also co-leads and those that need to be involved. We quantified the GHG reductions. This is basically a simplified version of what we actually quantified, as well as the cost of the action for the city and the cost for other stakeholders. Like, for example, if it's a piece of infrastructure, there's gonna be a lot of private investment to that. And then also qualifying and quantifying to some degree and ranking the benefits of each action. And these benefits include things like jobs, safety, resilience, access. For every action, we try to quantify or qualify these things. And I'll give you some examples of that, right? And why that's important, it's about communication. People, what we've learned, or at least I've learned in my career, is that the average person does not understand what a ton of greenhouse gas really is, and CO2 is. So how do you communicate these actions to understand that most climate actions also have some other major benefits that come with it? And I would say in some cases, those benefits are even more important than the greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, something as simple as separating organic waste, right? In New York City, we're starting to separate organic waste in our waste stream, in the municipal waste stream. But what does that mean? What it does is actually put our organic waste, takes it away from bags and puts it in these bins. These bins are rodent resistant. So it reduces the amount of vermin and rodents on the streets, improving health and safety. Another big and probably one of the most important actions in the plan was the building energy performance mandates, which really turned into what is now called Local Law 97, which are basically caps for commercial office buildings in New York, commercial buildings across New York City, and it's going to expand beyond that, putting a greenhouse gas emission cap on these buildings. And if they don't meet that, they're going to have to pay a fine, and that starts in 2024, the fines. What's critical here is it's going to create a lot of jobs. And I think that's how you can help communicate these things. Yes, you're going to have to do some work to retrofit your buildings, but in the meantime, you're also helping to create a substantial amount of jobs across New York, and in the design of these retrofits, and the construction of these retrofits, and the commissioning of these retrofits. You're also going to improve health. You're going to reduce the amount of fossil fuels in these buildings, which reduces air quality. And we've studied the impact on particulate matter, for example, and how much particulate matter might be reduced, thus potential hospital visits and asthma cases and such. So it was really critical to understand these benefits, because it's a good way of communicating climate action. Then looking at the spatial impacts is also, you know, and especially with this audience today, especially critical in understanding climate mitigation, which I think is sometimes difficult to kind of translate. And what we try to do is translate these things, and you can translate greenhouse gas emissions with benefits. So for example, if we're reducing the amount of, one of the bigger things in the plan is a commercial waste zone, a commercial waste franchises across New York City. What that does is organize the amount of vehicles, garbage vehicles collecting waste, and it decreases the amount of vehicle miles traveled across the neighborhood. So people can see the impact of these actions in their neighborhoods, or creating more bicycle paths. Or as I mentioned before with the building mandate, understanding the air quality improvements across neighborhoods with this mandate. So it allows people to understand the impact of these climate actions, and not just in a greenhouse gas emission point of view, but really how it impacts them, their everyday life in their neighborhood. Part of the exercise is always prioritizing the actions. So we use a number of metrics to do so, or a number of metrics to do so. So we used greenhouse gas emissions, you know, obviously being important because it's a climate mitigation plan. Feasibility is also critical, and we came up with criteria to do that. And what that really means is, you know, is it achievable or not given the political context? The cost of the action, and then as we mentioned earlier, the benefits of the action. We normalize all the benefits for each action to come up with a score. The benefit analysis, going into a little bit more detail, had a number of topics, and each topic had a set of criteria and questions. Quality jobs, economic innovation, workforce development, as we mentioned, resilience indicators, access, community participation. These important benefits, you know, really help highlight why this action is sometimes in some cases more important even than the greenhouse gas emission reduction. But what I really want to try to kind of say here is that, you know, that's why we're doing this benefit analysis. It helps communicate these climate actions to people, and the idea here is, and what's critical, beyond the greenhouse gas mitigation, which is once again something we had to do for each action, but there's other actions, what we call enabling actions or accelerating actions, that are critical to being able to achieve the much larger climate action, greenhouse gas emission impact action. So for example, there's little things like, I would say little things like rent issues and doing energy retrofits in existing residential buildings, where the landlord would put that on the new renter, that cost. And we don't want that, because that won't work. And so these little enabling actions, I call them little, but they're huge. And those things need to happen now in order to achieve these climate actions. And, you know, communicating the benefits of these enabling actions and also these other impacts helps people understand the need and and how we need to accelerate our planning and our policy making and our infrastructure development. So just going into a little bit, you know, just kind of summarizing this, you know, we need to start implementing these actions now. That's the biggest lesson learned from this exercise. You know, you saw the trajectory earlier. That's in this bold line. You know, we weren't meeting our 2030 targets. We're not on target to get to even 2050, and we need to get to carbon neutrality. So it's critical that policymakers, not just in New York City and elsewhere, start developing policy now, because it takes 3 to 5 years to start implementing some of that policy, and that's just the start. And also, it takes 3 to 5 years minimum to build infrastructure, and to plan it, build it. So these small enabling actions need to happen immediately, really, in order to get some of the barriers removed from achieving some of the larger greenhouse gas emission reductions. And as I mentioned, we you know, the biggest thing that we learned from, and I say from any climate action plan, I say to all my clients, is we need to do it now. We need to start now. 2030 is coming, and then we only have 20 years left. And so it needs to happen now. Anyways, thank you so much for the opportunity today. I put a link to the plan, and it'll be posted, as well as the community energy map mapping that we did as part of the project as well. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Adam. I have one or two questions here that I've lined up. I got several, but because of time limit. But one of the things that I'd like speakers to just address in some way or share your experience is the fact that it'd be a good idea, of course, that you have so many plans. These are doing quite well. And I think the Malaysian ones, of course, already embedded in the planning system as well as the strategic systems of the country. Let's draw back a little bit in relation to some of the things that you guys are doing. Is it, for example, embedded already in the planning system that you're doing, especially for Adam and Dirk in this sense? I gather these are wonderful documents that has been prepared. Are these adopted at city level, or are they embedded? And are they embedded in the land use planning, for example? And if not, how are you going to address how to embed those? And then we go on from there. That's kind of my first questions, please.
Yeah, if I can answer that first, because I have to leave now. I need to be gone in a few minutes. So there is quite a lot of legislation in Europe that is, of course, the main thing is coming from the European Commission down to be translated to the legislation and regulation in the individual member states. And there are large-scale climate goals there as well. Then the different states are doing something on their own as well. And Norway is an associated member, but it still implements most of the overall policies as well. And the Norwegian emission goals are quite strict and quite high. Also because the energy system is a bit easier. So for example, at the moment, we have 98% of the electricity comes from hydropower. But a lot of the heating comes from burning waste. And we have an issue there with the rising number of electric vehicles, because it's starting to overload the grid. So new hydropower plants would have to be built, or you would have, as I presented, more local energy production to enable this as well. And what we are working on is both regulation changes on the European level to allow this more local generation and exchange, but also linking up with city strategies overall, with how this gets translated into climate goals, into sustainable energy action plans, into mobility plans, into land use plans, etc. And that is both a strategic way of thinking, it's a planning thing, but it's also change in the way that the cities do business. So through some of the projects and also through ongoing societal changes, for example, the city of Trondheim has changed the approach of how they deal with certain issues by aligning internal strategies quite strongly with the UN SDGs. Trondheim has actually set up a UN Center of Excellence to be able to translate selected UN SDGs into local policy and into regional policy. So it's really about playing the different levels of strategy, not waiting for the large one to happen or only relying on the local one, but being able to combine all this, which is also something that Adam showed in his view. A lot of things are cross-cutting. If you only focus on one area, you can do something, but for the large impact that we need, you need to be able to look at the different levels and look at the different domains and try to link them up.
Great, thanks for sharing on that. That's very useful. I'm sorry you had to leave, but I understand.
Yeah.
But
bye everyone. So much. It was very interesting.
Adam, do you have any views?
Yeah, some of this stuff is already in policy already. Yeah, so it's everything has to be approved by basically city council. So for example, the commercial waste zone stuff, that started. This is how long things take, which is really the message I was trying to get. That started in 2016 with a study. It took about 2 more years to understand the impact that it might have on communities. And now they've already created the local law. The policy has already been approved. So now they're in the process of starting implementation for that. But most of this, I would say, has to be approved by whether it's city policy. Some cases it might be state policy. Right. There might be state requirements. on the city that that has to be changed. But a lot of these things do require some level of policy change, and it's usually started at the department level, and then it goes to city council. And then some of the larger kind of infrastructure projects, I wouldn't say necessarily need to be policy change. It just basically needs to be developed by the city or a third party, state or a third party.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Yes, it's good to know the experience from the other countries, if you like, on this scope. I have a question here that applies to everyone very much. I'll just read it out. It says, how do we ensure achieving net zero emission does not compromise economic development of the cities? What's your experience or your past experience on this, and whether you can offer any advice? I'll start with Adam, because I think you guys are probably more advanced compared to Malaysia, but nevertheless, we would like to hear the views of my Malaysian colleagues as well. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, real quickly. I mean, I think, yeah, I would say about a decade ago, I think people were really worried, even 5 years ago, people were worried about how this might impact economic development. The reality is that a large part of stakeholders now care about this, right? So those commercial entities or even residential entities or whatever it is that are developing, there are, the people that are going to be living there ultimately want to live in a low carbon community. At least, I'm not saying everyone, but a portion of them. There also are, other benefits as well, and that's critical. It's a really important question, because as somebody who's trying to implement these things or create the policy and then implement these things, you have to show what are the economic benefits of the proposition. It's critical. So, I would say that we're definitely moving in the right direction. I hear it all the time about certain types of corporations making commitments, and you just have to align with that. But there is still some work to go. But I said that one of the better things you can do is start really taking time and effort to focus on some of the economic benefits, like job creation, and also potential revenues associated with some of the strategies that you have in your development, for example.
Thanks, Adam. Dalia, any comments?
Hi, Boyd. I think for Malaysia, when you talk about emissions, we've spoken about public transport. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. We've spoken about public transport, but one of the main polluters are, of course, like factories, emissions from factories, and those are one of the economic powerhouses in the country. So what are the impacts, of regulating factories to have to abide to carbon neutralization? So I think you should then be weighing the cost to the communities as well. Yeah. So I think for Malaysia, I think we should actually focus on the factories, because a lot of pollution and laxity of maybe monitoring, and also local authorities, they should be more should be putting their foot down probably, on these factories. And the other worry, of course, is investments from other countries, investment into Malaysia. Yes. And if you find that countries who want to invest in Malaysia, they want to invest and produce rubbish goods, goods that are related to paper mills, So how do we respond to that? How, in the context of you want FDIs, but you are taking in very pollutive industries in the country. So I think that is a sector that needs really examination and commitment from the government, from the economic boys, how we can handle that the best for the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalia. Zalisa, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think my comment is just that we need environment, but the environment doesn't need us. So it's just short because to enhance and develop, we need natural resources. So if we demolish everything, our natural resources, and doesn't take care of them, how are you going to pursue a sustainable economy? That's all. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question here, which is from the chat box relating to Zaliza. It says here, it's quite mundane, I suppose, but it's quite important for the fact that it's a necessary thing to have and critical. It says, do you face any challenges in collecting data in achieving low carbon cities? It's quite straightforward, but it's be quite interesting to hear your views because it's from one of our participants.
Okay, thank you. I believe the questions is from Miss Liu. I think I already typed it up in the chat box. But however, actually in Plan Malaysia, we are not yet collecting any data. What are we trying to do is that we're trying to have a guidelines that guide to not the implementation, to prepare the local plans so that in the future our local plan has some basis of to make strategies and also programs. Because right now, a lot of nations are practicing evidence-based basis. So this GHG inventories, every local authorities, every plans needs to have this kind of information in order for us to make better decisions to allocate what is suitable, then use that is the best for our plans.
Okay, I got another question here from the panel. It's for the panel. This says, for developing countries like Malaysia, what's the most plausible route to achieve net zero? So for developing countries like Malaysia, what's the most plausible route to achieving net zero? What is your advice? Perhaps I'll start with Dalia, and then perhaps Adam has some idea to share, please.
Actually, Malaysia has just maybe midway. It's starting, so to achieve the neutrality, it needs, I think most of the focal points, we're very excited to do this, but the challenge is the implementation, yeah, and I would just generally say we are halfway there. There is support, but if you want to calculate the figures, we might be quite away yet at the moment. Yeah, so that there needs to be commitment. There needs to be commitment local governance. There needs to be commitment in the leadership as well. Thank you.
Adam, any comments from your side, from your part of the world, as it were? Please.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's commitment. I think that's in alignment of in terms of the levels of government as well, with that commitment. That's going to be critical. Like I said, it's starting about the policies. I think some of the elements mentioned earlier about public transport and setting up that infrastructure, as well as creating more walkable communities. I think sometimes, and also on the planning side, on the land use planning side, preventing sprawl is an issue, because the communities that are being planned now, those impacts are going to be felt for the next 20-30 years, so minimum. So there's I would say trying to prevent sprawl, but really the commitment to do so, and the commitment from policymakers that this is real, this is serious, and we need to make decisions about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and getting to net zero.
Yep, I tend to agree too, because it's experience from my previous job at Iskandar Malaysia is very much commitment and very strong support. You need the support from all levels of the government, obviously. It cannot be just from the top, but from the, if you like, from the people themselves, needs to be in there, and they understand what's going on. So that's an important message to take through. I'm afraid that we have to stop here, everyone. It's a great honor to be hosting this, and I have a lot more questions, and I'm sure you have too, but we need to end this. Possibly we will do another webinar at some point. Possibly then I want to share with you a platform which is the culmination of this work that we're trying to do relating to the GTALCC, a project which is funded by GEF7, I think, GEF7, and UNDP as the partner for Malaysia. And of course, when Dalia mentioned about LCS, we are also part of this project together with the 5 local authorities in Iskandar Malaysia at the time. So here we are. It's about my L3 relating to empowering cities towards a low carbon future. It's virtual, so please join us as much as you can. This time I won't be moderating. I'm probably going to be speaking in one of the sessions and on one of my favorite topics. So I hope to see you then. It's happening on the 13th of July on a Tuesday. So please get in touch and get more information for this one. But this promises to be a really big event because it will have the government, the Prime Minister is expected to speak at this point, and a big group of people globally will also be present at that time. So it'll be an interesting event. I think that's probably the last slides. And of course, very much from my own point of view, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for staying and for coming, for joining us.
Excelente.